Hello everyone, this is Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm José.
I'm Mike.
And today we have a special guest, Lee Kemp, who is one of the major local producers in the Midlands. And we are going to be talking about Widows again. And the reason for talking about it again is because I just think it's great, and the first time I saw it, I thought, I've really got to see it again and just pay more attention to the visuals, right? Because I think the first time I was quite caught up in the narrative, but I knew that the film had more to offer that I wasn't quite grasping. And then, of course, kind of Lee online, was equally interested. So we decided to kind of go together and hash it out once more and bring in a reluctant Mike who I think didn't quite see a reason to see it a second time.
Damn right I didn't.
But who perhaps has changed his mind.
Perhaps. Well, let's see what Lee thought first of all.
Yes.
So why were you, Lee, so keen on seeing it again?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And I really enjoyed it the first time round, and I think along much the same lines as you, Jose. I felt like it deserved at least one more viewing, and I think probably more as well. It's the sort of film that appeals to me in a lot of ways. I remember when I first saw the trailer, months and months ago, and I was not particularly interested in it. I thought it might be, Friday, I've been scrolling through Netflix for an hour and a half and can't decide what to watch, and I'll just kind of give up and watch something that requires no brains. I thought it was going to be that kind of movie. Yeah. Then I saw it was directed by Steve McQueen, and I went, right, okay, that should be interesting, if nothing else. And so watched it, really enjoyed it, thought there was a lot more to it, listened to you guys talk about it and not entirely agree. And I was just really interested to kind of go back and revisit just a lot of the thematic stuff. I think it's exquisitely structured. And one of the things I kind of particularly took away from this viewing was it's just full of tiny details, tiny thematic callbacks, bits here and there that
such as.
So when Viola Davis' character Veronica goes and sees Colin Farrell, what's his name, Jack somebody?
Mulligan.
Yeah, Jack Mulligan. And she says, "When's the last time you saw my husband?" And he answers like a politician, even though he doesn't want to be. He says, "Before he died, it was ages ago." And it's technically true and technically a lie at the same time. Yeah. And I thought it was full of like just those tiny little touches here and there. I thought it was great.
And Mike, what did you think on this second viewing?
Well, as you said, I was reluctant to revisit it because I felt like I'd got the measure of it first time really, and I felt like it was just a film that I didn't particularly get on with, although I respected it. I did like it more the second time. It wasn't due to any of its visual qualities or anything that you wanted to revisit it for, I don't think. I didn't see... I mean, that shot in particular that you talked about where Elizabeth Debicki's character is being sort of fading into the sort of lights reflected by the window. I thought,
Oh, you see, I thought it was as beautiful as the first time, and as expressive, and I saw many more shots like that actually.
But what I saw in it this time that I didn't particularly appreciate as much as I could have the first time was the structure. Lee pointed out it is brilliantly structured, and there is purpose and kind of more than one meaning to everything. It's an incredibly efficient script.
Yes.
That it gets all sorts of meanings out of simple things, or maybe not dual meanings, but dual purposes. Everything is kind of operating on multiple levels in a way.
Can I interrupt for a second? Because I think one of the things that makes this film so interesting is that it's taken almost the opposite trajectory of what you normally expect. When you normally expect a film to have had some kind of cultural impact or just to be old or whatever, and then 10 years later, 20 years later, it gets turned into a TV series for HBO or Netflix, right? That's kind of the usual pattern. And this is the opposite, right? And I think it's really interesting because, the more time and space you have to work on something, kind of you can give it more space, right? And there's a focus on narrative. But the more you condense, you have to kind of render poetic, right? You are actually kind of condensing information, so every little thing has to kind of work on multiple layers, right? Yeah. So I thought this was interesting, that something that can work as an extended narrative, all of a sudden, has to be kind of rendered poetic to work at all. Yeah, it's got to. I don't mean to sound to say poetic as in make it fancier.
No, I know what you mean.
I just think the form, kind of film form, when you have to kind of convey a world and a story and a theme and everything in 90 minutes, things have to symbolize. They have to work on different levels, right?
Well, I don't even want to go overboard on the multiple levels thing. I know I said it, but I mean, even things as simple as just making every line of dialogue count. You know, like for instance, the scene that kind of struck me was the one where Viola Davis goes to visit Elizabeth Debicki when she's sleeping with the guy, and they only have 8 lines of dialogue between them, maybe, but every single one means something, and they all talk about something different. So there's a great sense of kind of focus and purpose to it, and I think I was wrong about the first time was I talked about it being slow, and I think it's one of those things where when you go back and see a film a second time, it does feel shorter. It always does, because you know what to expect.
Well, it could feel longer if it's no good. Actually,
I suppose it could.
You can have either experience of that.
Well, typically for me, it tends to feel shorter because I know what to expect, and so I understand. Like when I don't know what's coming up next, it can sometimes drag because I don't really know how the kind of pacing works or anything. But having the picture of the entire film in my head, I can see how things are going, and so it felt tight and short, and that shot in particular that I picked up on the first time is kind of a stunt, one of Steve McQueen's long take stunts.
The one in the car where you're outside the car.
That's right. So Colin Farrell starts off outside the car, saying goodbye to the people he's been talking up, the black local community that he's talking about being a kind of local hero for. Gets into the car, and then he has a conversation with his
wife.
His secretary, I think, or second in command.
I thought it was his wife.
Well, red-headed paperweight, as his dad calls her.
But I thought that was his wife.
Well, he's got an ex-wife, hasn't he? And when they're in the sort of what years ago would have been a gentleman's club, she's not sat with them, is she? So
you're right.
Think,
okay, yes.
So
and they have a conversation, and they're being driven to where he lives, which is in a much nicer part of town, but it's not very far away. And then they get out, and so that scene struck me as kind of a stunt because it's a very noticeable cinematic technique that's being used, But I mean, it was pointed out by David on Facebook, David Sugarman. More to that shot than I picked up on the first time, because I picked up on that it's going from a place of poverty to a much nicer area, and that was the central thing I kind of picked up on, and that is true. I mean, that's part of the shot, but also there's the fact that they're having a very candid, racist conversation. I mean, he says to her, have you ever slept with a black guy before? And it becomes this kind of jealousy thing about him. And he talks about these people killing each other. These people, he says, like they're animals, like they're savages. And you can just see through the tinted windscreen that the driver is black.
Yeah.
So he's in the car with them, hearing all this, and there's no consideration given to him. And that's again, it's part of the shot, it's part of the composition. So I respected that shot an awful lot more the second time, and I see it as far less of a stunt now, and that's partly thanks to David, and it's partly thanks to just being a little less prejudiced, seeing the film, being a little less kind of going, okay, he's going to do one of these shots at some point.
Yes, having a bit more of an open mind.
A little bit. I didn't go into it closed-minded at all. I was really looking forward to it the first time, and I didn't quite get on with it. And I still don't hugely like it, but I think what we picked up on what you said in the first podcast, that it's hard to love. I think it's true that his films are hard to love, Steve McQueen's. And that's an issue for me. It's a film that doesn't make me feel anything. You said it was quite moving.
I find this one very moving.
I don't.
Oh, you see. We can talk about it, but I'm interested in what you picked up.
Well, that shot in particular, it was a little lost on me the first time because I think it's 2 minutes altogether, and we were quite a long way into it before I'd sort of. Because the artifice of putting the camera on the front of the car and why are you framing it like this, and I got lost in all of that immediately, and then it had taken me a while to kind of catch up. Whereas this time, what struck me about it in particular was just how fast it goes from poverty. They're literally not from the beginning of the shot to the end of the shot, but it's literally a street or two, and you're into like
Mansions.
Investment. There's a mall, all that kind of stuff, and then you get into mansions and all that kind of stuff. And what I thought was interesting about that shot as well was at the very beginning, it's talking about investment and rebuilding, and at the end, it's actually happening, but it's happening in the rich part. He's got all of the workmen around his house, and all that kind of stuff, and it's all of that. And this is why it's one of those films that rewards more viewing. Absolutely.
I think that point, Lee, that you made about the artifice of some of the shots being kind of distracting the first time.
Yeah.
That is completely true for me.
Yeah.
The second time I see the film, I know that the shots are coming, and so that wasn't distracting. I was able to appreciate the art of them more.
Can you talk a little bit about structure? You were saying that one of the things that struck you most was the structure of the thing.
Well, it's obviously it's as you say, Mike. It's working on a number of levels. It's whilst it's long, it is incredibly efficient, and you know every line is very specific and all that kind of stuff. And I just really liked the way it. There's a symmetry, I think, about quite a lot of it, about the characters, about the kind of who they are, and you know where and when they come into the film, and all that kind of stuff. And the fact that the heist is just 10 minutes at the end of the film. You know, in most movies that would be, you know, the third act completely. Yes. And so it's the interlocking pieces, I think, as much as anything that I admired.
Yes. I think to me the heist in this film is almost a MacGuffin in a way, right? Like, you know, I think the film is about grief and race and America and, you know, how the whole system is broken, you know, and the heist is just kind of a mechanism through which to explore those themes. Yeah. You know, I mean, the heist is a way of, you know, introducing you to Robert Duvall's racism. It's introducing you to the Colin Farrell character being actually even more corrupt than the father, even though he claims to be, you know, completely different, that he's only interested in art and other things, but really he's behind the whole scam, right? He's stolen the money, right? He's part of the organizing, So, you know, the notion that kind of, you know, black intelligent corporate types, you know, leave crime because, you know, actually they might not make as much money per week, but they can make more long-term, keep more of it long-term and be safe for doing it. It's a smart business decision, but it really is a parallel to another kind of crime. I mean, you know, gangsterism and politics are one and the same in this. Yeah, the film does all kinds of extraordinary things with that, whilst at the same time, you know, exploring questions of gender, you know, and very much like the film begins with all of these, you know, 4 women in grief, like they've just, you know, they've lost husbands whom they loved, right? You know, so the whole thing is overladen with grief, you know, and actually with grief commingled with love and pragmatism, right? Because, you know, the last scene, you see that, you know, she's completely in love still, you know, with Liam Neeson, can't believe what she's done, but now kind of willing to protect herself with it, right? Yeah. But there's a lot of tenderness and anger and love all kind of intermingled together, right? So, you know, the film is not about the heist. Yeah. You know, the heist is the way of bringing these characters together to explore these themes, I think.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think one of the interesting things about the grief element as well is the scene with Michelle Rodriguez's character, the widower of the architect, because when I was watching it first time round, I thought, okay, so she's going to manipulate him, and actually it's nothing to do with that, and it never comes back to that. It's just, you know, one of those primal moments, I think.
Yes, which it's a beautiful moment in the film, I think. Yeah. You know, I was thinking how each of the main protagonists get their scene, you know? Right. Okay. And that's Michelle Rodriguez's scene, right? which I think it's part of the way that the film is like a marvel of structure.
Yeah.
That these moments are kind of distributed throughout the film. And they all have one. Yeah, I mean, Robert Duvall, has two, right? The moment with his son and the moment where he's killed.
Yeah.
Right. So the distribution of that, I think, is really quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
Mike?
I wouldn't go overboard with the thing about isn't it clever that the heist is only there as a hook, because I think it's just a clever genre movie. I mean, any clever genre movie will use its genre as a means
I think you're understanding it, saying it's just a clever genre movie. Though.
No, I just mean that part of it is like, don't oversell.
No. Well, I just disagree with you, because actually I love the Ocean's films. But what are the Ocean's films about? I mean, they're not.
That's what I mean. They're not clever. They're not clever genre movies. They're just genre movies.
But I think.
Okay.
So,
what is a clever genre movie?
What I mean
so
is just,
common.
I don't think. I just don't think it's so unusual to find that this film, which on the surface you think is going to be one thing, turns out to be actually just using that as a hook for something so much deeper. I don't think that's the clever. I don't think that's the noticeable part of it. What it does with with what it's doing is what's noticeable.
Well, I think that to me the two. I'm not. I'm just observing that is what it's doing, and I'm admiring, because actually I think it's great.
But I think it's much more. I think it's much more art house than genre, though.
Oh, completely, totally.
Because I remember, in a really weird way, it reminds me of Seven, which is was sold as a kind of serial killer slasher movie and all that kind of stuff, but actually it's this really intelligent meditation on the nature of good and evil and all that kind of stuff, but it's hidden away in it. It's not hard to unpick particularly, but it's there, and you can actually unravel it quite a lot and do some interesting things with it. And this was kind of the same, if not a little bit further down that road, because I was talking to one of my team about it today who saw it over the weekend, and he was just kind of, it's all right, the bank robbery, it was that kind of thing. And I think if you're not willing to put the work into it, or you don't come at it from the right kind of point of view, I think it is immediately, it's just not a very good heist movie.
To be honest,
if you don't spot all that stuff.
I think that's an interesting point, like the kind of balance between genre and art, if you like, if that's how you sort of want to think about it, is how much of the pleasures of the genre movie are in this film. And
very few.
The answer is, I would say, not so many. Yeah. I think the heist is very exciting.
Yes.
I found it more exciting the second time as well. But the bits where they are in the garage planning and discussing are not hugely exciting.
Okay, well, I think Lee's right, because in that sense, it's not really a heist movie. I think if you think that the heist film has general structures, like what is the robbery going to be like, rehearsing it, kind of getting all the people involved and doing their bits, kind of doing a bit that doesn't work out, pointing out the problems that have to be overcome, then the problems that become a barrier to the success. There's a pattern to the heist film. This is not like that.
No,
this is a
most
movie.
of the work has been done for them. They just pick it up from the lockbox that he left for them. In terms of, they do have to do some planning and some, kind of when she goes to the gun show and when she buys various things, they do have to do elements of planning. But in terms of like doing so much of it and getting things wrong and trying things out, you're right. There's less of that.
But I think you could have made this movie as a genre movie.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And if you look at, so if you take the music as an example, like again, one of the pleasures of viewing something that you enjoy again is you're a little bit closer, but a little bit more distant at the same time, and you can kind of stop and look and all that kind of stuff. So the music, so there is heist music in it because it's Zimmer, and it reminded me of The Dark Knight quite a lot. And kind of repetitive, building tension, strings kind of thing. And it only appears 3 or 4 times, and it's always in heist moments.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
I missed that because in the music, what I was paying attention to was the Nina Simone and the Van Morrison and the Sade, right? And not,
But it does do that kind of ding.
It is funny you notice, because on the Wikipedia page it does say, score by Hans Zimmer, and you go, that's a big name, Hans Zimmer.
Yeah.
And you watch the film and you go, where is it?
Yeah, but it's only it is only used when they're doing like heist genre thing. So it's heist genre music when they're doing heist genre things. That's the only time, and I found that really interesting as well. So,
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to revisit it for the visuals because, of course, Steve McQueen is a Turner Prize-winning visual artist,
Yeah.
right? And I did pick up on quite a few things that I found interesting the first time around, but kind of I was wrapped up, and I was very moved by it, like the whole thing about the grief. There's some scenes that are just kind of so stunning, right? Like the whole beginning and how it's done, right? Because before the credit sequence comes out, what you have is, this black woman, kind of this white bed, Liam Neeson, right? Then it goes back a bit, right? And then you have another woman, then it goes back. It's almost like the whole beginning is past tense, right? It's kind of, it shows you something, and then you realize that actually it's the memory of something because they're already dead, right? Like it's a kind of an incredible, way of beginning, really. And just the textures of things, right? The black face on the white bed, with the white dog, right? Kind of, there are all those things that I just thought were kind of beautiful and evocative and so sad, like so I think the film also is quite sexual, right? Like that kind of it's like kind of your id or your unconscious desires explode in ways that are messy and unexpected and take you by surprise. The scene with Michelle Rodriguez is one of those, right? Like that kind of, it seems to happen and it seems to go out of control, like out of both of their controls, and yet it's in some ways understandable, right? Like kind of, So I've lost track, but all of those things fascinated me, and I thought kind of that I wasn't paying enough attention to what a world famous, award-winning visual artist was actually doing, within the frame itself, and actually visiting it this time around. I'm just gobsmacked. I think it's extraordinarily beautiful, and beautiful not in the sense of pretty, but in the sense of expressive and innovative and surprising, right? Kind of, that last shot in the cafeteria with Viola Davis looking at the beat key, and both of them kind of reflected in the glass, but really kind of, one looking, so
looking in different directions.
It's kind of, but both being reflected in columns of glass. I mean, that's just kind of visually stunning, really,
I thought that as a coda in particular was really nice, and the blocking in that scene is quite good as well because the camera doesn't particularly move. Then she comes in and Veronica's obscured by the waitress, so you kind of come in and you see her and then she moves out of the way and she's there and they just have that moment which I think is really, really lovely. And then they come outside and again it's the small things. She's getting in a car because she drives now because she's much more in control of her own destiny and all that sort of stuff. And it's the first moment where Veronica's human. Like the first time she really, just reaches out to another human being as a human being, which I thought was great.
The film's incredibly elegant in its direction.
Yes,
that's how I put it. When you talk about the blocking, it's like the film, despite the fact it does have shots which are quote unquote slightly stunty. It does things with long takes and moving the camera around, particularly those shots with Daniel Kaluuya being threatening. Those are all in long takes and moving camera. Despite occasionally kind of showing off, if you like, there's incredible elegance, and most of the time it's the staging and the blocking means that the work is kind of done for the camera already. The camera doesn't have to do anything that crazy most of the time to achieve its effect in a way. So what you said about the blocking in that final scene where she comes in and the waitress is in the way and she moves and they're just sat in the perfect place and the camera's just sat in the perfect place to capture everything. Like it's so elegant. I can't think of a better way to put it than that. It's thoughtful.
Everything is thoughtful and thought through.
Well, even a a perfect example of that, and another example of those kind of small touches and stuff like that. When Cynthia Erivo's character, I can't remember what she's called, gets when she gets home the first time, her kids are watching an animated film on TV, and life isn't allowing her to kind of be at home with the kids and all that kind of stuff. She runs for the bus. She arrives at Michelle Rodriguez's house, and they're watching the same film.
I didn't notice that. That's incredible.
I just think it's a comparison of the two lives.
Yeah,
there,
fantastic.
So, and the stuff like when she's running, you hear the bus in the background, you hear the kind of wolf whistles and the calls and things like that, and the camera doesn't wait for her; she has to catch up to it.
Yes.
So it's just that elegance, the blocking, all that kind of stuff.
That's fantastic.
And it's so particular and meticulous, like every aspect of it really was. So,
What I noticed this time that I hadn't noticed before was the scene with the preacher. And he's in church, and he's talking about God. He's preaching, but the way that that's all structured, because actually it begins with close-ups, and actually an extreme close-up, right?
Yeah.
And you see this handsome, charismatic man, and then he begins to talk, and then the scenes opens out until at the very end. Right, you have people getting off their seats and speaking back and so on, and being completely involved. And then, of course, the end of the scene is actually a long shot of all of the seats empty, and then kind of the scene reconstitutes itself in the church, but now it's about talking business. But kind of reversing the normal tropes that you begin with an establishing shot, and then kind of you have normal continuity editing, and you go in. This is almost like the reverse of that. It expands, right, from kind of this individual face and voice speaking virtue, to like a con, basically.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I think the film is not particularly complimentary about the role of the church.
No.
So Liam Neeson gets out of the shower, like he's the one who betrays everyone in the film, and he's wearing a cross. You've got that close-up scene of crucified Christ. Jamal's HQ is in a church, separation of church and state. And then you've got all of that big scene in the church and all that kind of stuff. So I think it pops up every now and again, and because everything is so deliberate and meticulous and stuff, then it's not there by accident.
Yes.
When the church comes into the film, there's no talk of morality.
Yeah.
Even I would say, I mean, I don't remember the specifics of it that much, but even in what the pastor is preaching, I don't think he mentions God all that much. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think he's talking more about kind of social decay and things than that.
Only when he's talking business, isn't he? It's on that very last thing. He goes, praising Jesus.
Praising Jesus.
Like that, just as he's walking out. So
everything that church has to do is associated with politics and money and business and corruption.
Yes.
God doesn't enter into the conversation at all.
I think it's interesting as well to me that part of my admiration for the film is that it also doesn't minimize kind of what I would call black gangland brutality, right? Like actually most of the horrid crimes in the film are actually committed by Daniel Kaluuya.
Yeah.
And they're really quite brutal, right? Like kind of, it reminded me a little bit of the Cagney film of Angels with Dirty Faces, in the sense that it's both playful, like, kind of when he's stabbing Donald J. O'Connor in the...
Kevin J. O'Connor.
Kevin J. O'Connor. Like, it's kind of funny. Yeah, but it's kind of really brutal. Right? Like, and so kind of, and equally the scene where he shoots the rappers, right? Like
he makes them rap first.
He makes them rap first, and then there's a kind of a gleeful fun element. Because you realize, you just killed some brothers, right? And kind of then you're just rapping, right? So it doesn't. So what I mean to say is that in its argument on race and racism, which I think is actually very fascinating and complex, it doesn't absolve black people from, a role in it. Yeah.
Well, do you think there's anything deliberate in the fact that he's the only caricature I think, Daniel Kaluuya's character, in the sense that, I mean, he is. I think his performance is great.
I think it's great.
That scene that you were just talking about with the rapping, the way he walks in with the book, he knows exactly what's coming, but he just pauses a moment just to get to the end of his paragraph, and then he closes the book and moves on. You know, so but he just had the least. It's an amazing performance, but he's the least interesting character, I think.
He's the least dimensional character.
He's the least dimensional character. Yeah,
Yes.
it's not that he's not interesting, but yeah, he just doesn't have the sort of.
He's a caricature, but he's a very effective one.
Yeah,
And actually, and I think it's important to have him in the film, you know, because actually that is the stereotype, right?
But do you think he's deliberately dimensionless?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I very much do, because actually, again, he occupies quite a lot of screen space, right? And yet he is the one, he's not given any motivation really, or, you know, he's just kind of the arranger, he's the fixer, the guy who gets things, who gets the dirty job done, right?
He even questions, is he the brother of Brian Tyree Henry?
Yes.
Yes.
Because at the start, after they have the conversation right at the start of the film with Colin Farrell's character, and he leaves, he says, "Why do you even want to go into politics anyway?" It's ridiculous. So he doesn't believe in it at all.
Yeah.
He is purely just the enforcer. He doesn't have any belief in what he's been asked to do.
Not at all. I mean, he's basically doing the same thing for his brother now in politics that he was doing in gangs before. That's, you know. So
Which is, and that's the point that the film's trying to make, I guess.
I think so.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
That these two worlds are coterminous.
Yeah.
So,
But what can I move the conversation a little bit to the women, you know, and then actually to the men, because I think it's very unusual to have a film with, you know, the central protagonist is a black middle-aged woman. You know, which I think is extraordinary. And then, in a way, what follows from that trunk, I suppose, or the branches from that trunk, are the Michelle Rodriguez and the Elizabeth Debicki characters, right? You know, and so you understand their wants, their history, their desires, right? Their hopes, right? Kind of how they hope to change their life, you know, why their situation is awful, and how that relates to men, right? And actually, I think that is kind of extraordinary, really. You know,
Well,
so
all of the issues in their lives, like the whole film, stems from the men, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
But not just from the men.
Yeah.
You know, so for example, with the Michelle Rodriguez character, right? You know, you get a sense of a whole set of social relations, right? A whole kind of a structure of feeling, like, you know, so her mother-in-law hates her, blames her for what's happened to her son, even though she doesn't know that actually her son was a shit, right? You know, and is threatening to take away the kids, and like kind of I mean, I think as you said, Mike, the film is so economical in kind of, you know, everything that it does, but it evokes a whole kind of set of social relations which are very different for each of the women.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Debicki's mother is trying to pimp her out. Yeah. You know, like,
This is the point I was going to make about the women. Like, I think we've talked before about how great it is to have so many films about gay life these days.
Yes.
And one of the things that's so great about it is that they don't have to be trying to represent all gay people in one film.
Yes.
You can talk about different things. And when you think about the way women are portrayed in film, normally you get one woman in a film full of men.
Yeah.
You know, maybe two women.
Yeah.
So there's no there's no chance for interplay. I mean, that's what the Bechdel test is all about. You know, if women talking to each other without men being in the conversation.
Yes.
And so in this, you get to see a range of representations of women from different backgrounds, different races, different classes, different situations. Some of them got kids, some of them haven't. You know, she's got an overbearing mother. She's got her husband and son died. So you get to see all these different types of women, not types, but different experiences interrelating and interacting.
One of the reasons why I find the film so extraordinary is because, I mean, once you begin to think about it, you realize, but actually, as you watch it, you're not. But it's kind of like, you know, a model of intersectionality, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
You know, you have class, right? So, you know, you have the Viola Davis character, she's basically rich, right? You have the babysitter, what's her name, who does the running?
Cynthia Riva.
The Cynthia Riva character, you know, who's basically like the poorest of the lot, right? So you have two black characters of different races. You know, then you have like a Latina, and then you have a white person. Yeah, it is kind of and this is before you even begin to talk about the men.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's extraordinary for a film to be touching, you know, on all those dimensions and to kind of bring them together.
It has that feeling. It has that feeling of a classic heist movie in that respect, like Reservoir Dogs or something, where it's about those films are about groups of men interacting. Groups of men having different personalities, and you never question that because we're just so used to seeing that. You do the same thing, but change it to a group of women from different backgrounds and different personality types and so on, and all of a sudden it becomes remarkable because you never get to see that.
But actually, I think this film is more remarkable than those that you're bringing up as examples because, in fact, it doesn't ignore the men. Whereas actually, like, you know, Reservoir Dogs does, you know, ignore the women. You know, because I do think actually that the Liam Neeson character and the Duval and the Colin Farrell are just as important to the story as any woman in terms of the points that, you know, the film wants to make, right, or wants to dramatize, right, like, you know, and they're equally given really fully fledged, rounded characters, right?
Yeah.
So the story's not about them, but actually kind of who they are and represent is essential to the story.
Well, it's kind of ironic actually that in a film about women, the supporting male characters are written in a way that supporting female characters in the other films are just not.
Exactly.
You know,
and that's one of the things that makes the film remarkable and exceptional. You know, but maybe also. So you're right, it's a contradictory thing in the sense that it's part of why I think this film is so great, right? But on the other hand, it's part of a patriarchal privilege to do that, right? Yeah. So, you know, maybe it's not
it would be quite bold if it said we're going to write the women really well and write the men really badly to sort of
make
mock, to make the point that that's not the other way around.
But one of the things that people would complain about is, for example, you know, like, you know, you make a film with Jimmy Cagney or something, and the female role would just be a woman to be slapped around, right? But then you'd make a melodrama with Barbara Stanwyck, you know, and the guy would just be like some patsy who'd have like 4 lines, and so, you know, kind of she'd leave him and make a life of her own. So, you know, kind of, it is an issue, right, that is very elegantly resolved in this film. And also people have argued that maybe like part of the problem with classic cinema is that was the thing. You know, that if you make somebody a protagonist and if you just kind of reverse the gender, then, you know, the other gender just kind of became minimal or ineffectual or, you know. So i.e. if you have one protagonist and it's one gender, then the other is subsidiary.
Well, I think when you have a film that's one protagonist, everything has to relate to them in some way. That's what makes them the central figure. Yes. When you have an ensemble film like this, you get all this freedom to you know, no one has to take on that role of being central, having to have everything relate to them. So everything is able to, you like to have a web, you know, of interrelations, which is better.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying it's easy. It's better. I mean, the film aims really high and it nails it, I think.
Yes. So this is not quite an ensemble in that sense. I mean, there are hierarchies, aren't there? I mean, it is, you know, I think it's Viola Davis's film, then it's it's Michelle Rodriguez, Elizabeth Debicki, Viola Davis, then there's another rung, which is the men, and you know, so I'm
not saying it's perfectly even-handed, but you get my point, right?
No, I get your point, but I'm also trying to relate it to Lee's point about the structure, that it's so beautifully structured that it allows, you know, to get fully rounded characters on all of these different levels and representing such different things and playing such an interesting and almost catalytic role in the narrative, right? Because, you know, they all do something that pushes it forward, right? Like, you know, and they all have a relationship with each other. I mean, I think the Colin Farrell, Robert Duvall thing is so interesting to me because it's so subsidiary. You know, like kind of, you know, if you rank which are the most important people in the film, they wouldn't rank very high. Yet, you know, you have a whole thing about the politics of yesterday, the politics of today, how similar they are, even though the father and son have like this great conflict about how things should be.
Yeah.
Right. There's a whole Oedipal struggle built into that. Right. I mean, I think it's quite amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so as well. I thought when you take a step back and look at these things are always about kind of equilibrium, disequilibrium, equilibrium, all that kind of stuff. The only characters who change are the four women, because when at the end of it, Jamal isn't the alderman. Colin Farrell is, even though he doesn't want to be.
Yeah.
All of the guys are dead, etc., etc. So it does kind of have that classic the arc.
Yeah.
Everybody's learned it. It does do those things, but just in a way that you don't really notice too much, which I think is extraordinary.
I think it's worth mentioning also, that the script is co-written by
Gillian Flynn and Steve McQueen.
Yeah.
I think you made a big deal out of this in the first.
I picked up on the fact that she's obviously a big name in screenwriting as well, and she wrote Gone Girl. That's what she's best known for.
I'm just commenting that it's something that you, Mike, raised in our previous podcast, and that I think it's interesting, to have like, a female kind of screenwriter, and then a black British filmmaker kind of working together on a British story that's transposed to America, and actually again bringing up this question of intersectionality, and that actually that might be some of the rationales for why the film is structured the way that it is, and deals with the issues that it does. Right?
And it's interesting, even with that provenance, it feels like such an American film. Not just in terms of like it's obviously a kind of Hollywood movie and stuff like that, but it's so representative of America in the same.
It's about America.
Yeah, absolutely. In the same way as Killing Me Softly was.
Yeah.
Yeah, a few years ago. It's very American now. Absolutely.
And originally written by Linda LaPlante, with the original TV series.
Yes.
Who, again, obviously a woman.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why she wrote it, because I think we said in the first podcast she was sick and tired of the role she was getting offered, so she wrote something better.
Yes. And you've seen Prime Suspect recently.
Yeah, I said after the first podcast I'm going to watch Prime Suspects, and I watched the first one, the first 3 hours and 20 minutes. You must have seen Prime Suspect.
I saw it when it came out.
You haven't, though?
Is it good?
It's really good.
It's really good.
Okay.
I mean, I thought, Jesus Christ, it's quite daunting at 3.5 hours, but I mean, it's fantastic. The performances are great. It is made for TV, so kind of visually, it's a little bit kind of plain, I guess, and it's all about dialogue really and performance. Though there are kind of visual pleasures. There's a great shot in it where Helen Mirren as Tennyson. She's on the verge of losing her job, and she's sat in front of the department that she's running, the murder investigation, and she's talking, and the sound carries on while she's talking, but she goes into the background and she's blurred out, and in focus in the foreground is like a game of Chinese whispers, where you go from one police officer to another, ignoring her, talking to each other, going, "Have you heard? I think she's about to lose a job." And as the conversation goes down the line and the camera pans round, following them, tracks round, it goes from a rumour to absolute fact.
Yeah.
And she has no say in it. She's in the background, not being involved in the conversation, blurred out. It's a brilliant shot, that one. I mean, that's like a Steve McQueen shot. It's a great show.
Can I bring two things together, really? So, kind of you were saying about how one of your colleagues or whatever had said that they'd seen the film, but right, it was okay or something.
Yeah.
And to me, I think part of the problem in watching films like these is that they are art cinema and they require a certain degree of visual literacy.
Yeah.
Right? Which I think it's astonishing that most people lack, actually. So, you'd think that after watching so much visual media all the time, that kind of you'd be more conversant with, being able to read visually, if one can say that.
But I think there's often, so we talk about ideas of cultural capital and stuff like that, and what a film like this prompts you to do is go, that's odd, why? And most people don't do the second half of it. a lot of the time. I got caught up quite a lot in one of the early shots. First time I was watching it, I was trying to work out actually which one was the real Veronica when she's sat there in front of the mirror grieving, and it's almost like a triptych.
Yeah, it's a wonderful shot. Wonderful image.
And then there's the dog on the bed, and then the next shot they cut to a close-up of her, which is clearly the mirror because it has that kind of slight.
Yes, there's a dual image.
Yeah, and she just gives this really animal scream, which kind of bookends the film as well because those are her only 2 moments of grief. But the first time I watched it, I was into the artifacts going, which one's the real her? So then when I was watching it again, I was like, okay, why? Like what is the film trying to do here? And I don't really have an answer for that, but I don't mind because you get to kind of sit here and talk about it, and that's what really good cinema should do.
Yes, so, I agree.
But most people don't do the second half of that equation. They just go, that's a bit odd. Like, why is the camera on the bonnet?
Yes,
so,
and
I do that too much. I mean, I start to try to sort of force myself sometimes to try to think critically about actually evaluate what a film is actually trying to do, rather than just go, oh, that seemed dumb.
Yes.
It can still be hard to do that. You have to be in for me at least, I have to be in a kind of deliberate frame of mind sometimes for that, I think.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I wanted to bring, your two things in together was, you having seen Prime Suspect, and the thing about, that kind of drama, which I think is 3 episodes.
The first one is 2 episodes. I think they're all 2 episodes.
Okay,
they're big episodes.
Yeah, they're long.
Apart from one of them, which is 3.
Yeah. And you have this space and narrative, and it is kind of very heavily dialogue, performance, structure, in that kind of TV miniseries.
Yeah.
As opposed to a kind of, a film, or really, it does have to be more condensed, right? Like, and so the visuals tend to occupy kind of a different role because they have to communicate various things simultaneously, along with the dialogue and so on. And I think actually that becomes kind of part of the problem of watching a film like Widows, that you have to be attentive, to those things because they convey so much. And actually you're not used to, so we think we've grown up watching films, and actually, the problem is that we've really grown up watching television, not films, right? And that even though we might have watched lots of television and lots of films, we're still kind of not used to thinking about it,
There's a great
second part of the question that you brought up. Sorry.
There's a great series of videos which I'm sure most people listening to the podcast will have heard of and seen, called Every Frame of Painting.
I knew you were going to say that. Yeah.
Every Frame of Painting by Tony Joe and someone else whose name I don't know because he never gave a credit. But there's one which he did on Michael Bay, and there's a line in it where he's talking about the editing and how everything's so fast and frenetic.
Bayhem. Yeah.
And he says we're increasingly visually sophisticated and increasingly visually illiterate. We can take in all these images that if you show Transformers, I mean, never mind it's about robots, if you showed something edited like Transformers to people who were watching films from the 1930s, they wouldn't be able to get a head or tail of it. We can understand it, but we can't interpret it. We don't have those tools to interpret, to actually get an evaluation of it. I mean, this is why we live in fucking Brexit and Trump world, because of
Transformers.
Because of like online advertising, that means you don't have any. If more people had the kind of tools, everyone took the piss for so long and still does of media studies degrees.
Yeah.
So you never get a job, blah blah blah. But like that teaches you tools to have a critical, to critically evaluate everything that you're seeing. It doesn't have to be films and TV. It can be lies that you're being told online.
Yeah.
And
B, it's not true, but it doesn't get you work.
Yeah, that's true. But so and I think it's like people still take the piss out of it, and those are the people who we really need now, because we live in a world where everything is communicated visually.
It is. Well, but actually, no. Please.
I was going to say, just on that, on that kind of, in that vein, another one of those every frame of painting videos is about Drive, which is a film that I really, really love.
I love it as well.
But it's about the way Nicholas Winding Refn uses the quadrants, which, when I'm having someone cleverer than me explain it to me, is really obvious. I never came near it when I was watching it. I had absolutely no idea that there's this other layer of visual communication, So I just thought it was like you can never have enough background in education in this kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, I think the thing about movies, and I always say this, is the line from Pauline Kael, but she would say that, the reason why movies are great is because they call on everything you know, right? And you never know enough, right? So let's say you know a lot about music or a lot about literature, a lot about graphic design. You could put all that knowledge to use and still actually be lacking kind of, other elements that kind of people have brought into it. Because, films are a collaborative kind of medium. And actually, because of the expense involved, it often does involve calling on, some of the most skilled people in the world to do particular things, as in this movie, right? So, of course, like, kind of the film, I think, or certainly the very greatest of films, and I think Widows is one of them, kind of, it does call on more, it is superior to you, if you know what I mean. Yeah, that kind of, you have all of these kind of extraordinarily people with extraordinary skills, putting all their skills to bear to kind of communicate one thing, right? And kind of maybe you get the one thing, but you're not getting all the layers behind it, and part of the pleasure of watching a film like this is to watch it over and over again to kind of, try to get to it, right? To get something that is like superior to you, but that nonetheless connects in some way. I mean, this film connected with me anyway.
Yeah.
I think a good place to start, for me at least, when I'm trying to think about kind of analysing a film, filmed imagery and so on, is the effect it has on me. Because I think, and this is where for me, Widows still falls down the second time, is that it didn't have an emotional effect on me. Yeah. Which is, and you can't blame the film for that really. That's just a case of not connecting like you connected.
Yes.
But I think I think storytelling, like ultimately, it's about the effect it has. So that video that you mentioned, the one on Drive, I found that video really dissatisfying because it was pointing out something that you could clearly pick up on from analysing the film in using quadrants, but it didn't explain to me anything that was about. It didn't then go and here's the effect.
Yeah.
Here's if you were feeling this might be what. So there's a case like if you try and like just decode a film as it were from sort of first principles, I find that quite dissatisfying. I think if I start off with the effect, then I have the question why the effect.
Yeah.
That's kind of where analysis starts for me, I think.
Yes. Well, that's a good place for it to start.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point, particularly in terms of it didn't. I admire and respect it for its artistry and its construction and its artifice and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't have a huge emotional. I don't have a huge emotional response to it in the same way that I do with, say, for example, Lone Survivor, which is not like anybody's favorite movie, but I love it because it's about things that impact you, like having been in the army and all that kind of thing. I'm a straight middle class white guy, like I'm the recipient of all the privilege, so to kind of look at.
I wouldn't put it that way, Lee.
Yeah,
I know of others.
But this film didn't have that huge. I didn't have this huge emotional response to it in the same way that I think you're kind of talking about, but I still loved it in the same way.
I think I wonder if it's maybe a question of age, because I really identify with
Viola Davis.
Yes, and because I think what I identify with is the way that the film complicates emotion. So that anger and love and a kind of a hunger for touch, you know, and betrayal.
It was quite a tactile film as well. There was quite a lot of that. Yeah.
You get a sense for people's need to touch and fuck, basically, and you know, to have a physical connection. And then also the loss of it, right? And kind of, you know, she's lost her son, she's lost her husband. Worse than that, she recovers her, finds he's betrayed her. Like, so she's been like crying over this man who's really been shit. But actually, you can also understand him, I think, or I do.
Yeah.
Right? So actually, this kind of complicated mixture or complicated response to something is not a typical movie something, but it's a typical life something where you can love and be angry at the same time and kind of mourn something and, you know, kind of try to overcome it and wish for it. And because the film structure, it's almost, part of it is always in the past. It's always of what was and what is lost, you know. And I identify with that.
I think that the way it does those things around grief, particularly the thing that you mentioned in the last episode where, like, you know, she's looking at the reflection, he's there, then he's not, when you come back to the real world and all that kind of stuff. I thought that was great, and it made me think of, like, I've never been in quite that position, you know, but I can think of, like, I was seeing somebody in Birmingham for a while, and everywhere I go, you know, it's a roadmap of that relationship. So I can imagine just, you know, being in the home where you raised a child and just how difficult that must be. And I thought the film did it really, really well.
Yes. I think...
that point where she goes into her child's bedroom, you get the feeling that door's been closed forever.
Yes.
You know, and then she goes into it for one time.
And the only thing that's in there, you know, because it's completely white, isn't it? You know, and it's stripped bare, except there's a pile of posters, and the first one is Malcolm X in that sort of two-tone Barack Obama style. You know,
but actually, you see the Barack Obama poster later.
Oh, right. Okay.
You know, so actually, it's very interesting because I think in the middle.
It's at the same time when she has not the flashback, when you are told the story of how he died.
Yeah. So whilst he's being killed, in the scene where he's being killed, you have the Obama poster, so it says Obama Hope,
right?
And it's exactly the same color and the same style of poster as the Malcolm X poster.
And I think when you talk about the like complex characters and complex relationships and stuff like that, I was really struck by the scene where she's putting the white glove on his hand in the funeral, and it's almost like, you know, is she like if you'd have had a child with somebody else, he'd still be alive, because they've just had the conversation about I didn't see myself being married to a white guy. So, like, the implication is he would probably have been married to a white woman, they'd have a white child, and that white child would still be alive. Because even though he's mixed race, you know, as I learned from university with you, one drop of black blood.
That's right.
You know, so that's...
And, you know, and actually, the film tells you very clearly, he got killed because he's black, really,
black,
you know.
Absolutely.
So, but then,
But I think that on that interesting thing in particular, as soon as he reaches over, you're like, no, don't do it, you're going to get killed. And you know, it's like, if you hadn't done that, you would just be alive. But I know if I'd have done that, I'd be alive, you know, and it's a different set of rules.
Yes, and also, how do people process those things? Because, you know, he's in the middle of a conversation, it's his mother's present, right? Like, you know, he's just putting down the phone, right? Like, so the film renders it completely understandable. But, you know, I do think that a film being so sensitive to the nuances of that is due to having a black filmmaker.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So that part in particular, maybe this is a little bit out of my depth, but the part in particular where he gets shot by the cop in the car, I think we see that way because of modern eyes, because that's clearly happening while Obama's campaigning. So it's just prior to Obama's election, or maybe just after it, when posters are still up. You know, it's around that era, and I think it was only really once Obama took office that we started to see all of these videos of police shootings of
Yes.
black people.
Yes.
So I wasn't quite. I mean, I'm sure this is like, you know, for black people listening and any black Americans who might be listening, this is like not news. But for me, that was when I really started to learn about all of that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think it was like when Obama was elected, it wasn't about the end of racism. It was we entered a new racial world. Where,
Yes.
you know, we kind of saw things differently, or we started to learn things. So I think that, but for me at least, it was the benefit of the hindsight of the last kind of 10 years of having learned about what situations actually are like for black people in America, that I knew immediately how that scene was going when I first saw it. If I'd seen that 10 years ago, I might not have.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we'd have probably watched it 10 years ago and gone, that wouldn't happen.
Yes.
Maybe.
Yeah, you know, so...
No, I think it's true. I think it's interesting because, you know, you have this sense of progress, you know, of you look at films, you know, from the 1930s and you think, oh, you know, we've evolved or whatever. And actually, well, you know, what I was thinking recently watching all these 1930s films is actually that we haven't, right? That kind of, you know, so when I was a young person, I would have arguments with my father about saying, oh, well, the world's not like that now, or, you know, I would say, oh, it's because you're Spanish, like Canada's not like that, right? Or, you know, and obviously he just thought I was like a naive, stupid idealist and didn't know the world, which was true, right? Yeah, and I think I kind of, you know, as you get older, you do think, well, things do change, but also actually so many things remain the same, really. Yeah, and kind of, you know.
I something that I meant to ask you actually, and having read another review, is the so Michelle Rodriguez's shop is and I can't remember the word, but it's
tiaras and
it's a Latin American thing.
Quinceañera.
Yeah, quinceañera, which is about coming of age, isn't it?
That's right.
You know, and that's not an accident. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts on.
No, I mean, I don't really, because and actually it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I wasn't sure whether it was a quinceañera or, you know, because they also have shops for graduations and proms, or you know, prom queens, right? Like it had tiaras in those big boofy dresses, and, you know, and so on. So the quinceañera bit, I mean, I did clue in that, you know, that it might also be for that. Yeah. But I didn't think it was especially for that. Okay. Yeah. I think it's, you know, I mean, if you know, if you were a beauty queen, or if, you know, you
we'll go to prom.
Yeah. Or,
but all of those things are coming of age.
Sure, they are actually.
You know, so,
no, you've got a good. That's a good point.
Yeah, but I couldn't quite unpack it. I wasn't sure what was going on there.
Yes,
and particularly it seemed to be feminine, right? I mean, that's why it's quinceañera. Like, it was particularly a shop for selling to girls.
Yes, I mean, yeah. I kind of, to be honest, I hadn't thought about that, because, you know, I think my focus was just on her husband stealing from her.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know? Yeah. So kind of.
And I was concentrating on how brilliant the cut was when when she's told, she goes in and finds her shops being taken apart and everything's being stolen. And the guy explains why, and that's in a long take, and then it cuts in. And I only noticed it the second time. I thought that was a whole long take the first time. It cuts in on a closer shot on a different lens, almost imperceptibly. Just towards the end, so you get a final close-up on her, and I thought, God, that's brilliant. Yes. That's just so, it's, again, elegant, beautiful editing.
Yes. I mean, there's so many brilliant things in it. So, I mentioned this in our first podcast, you know, but the close-up of Liam Neeson's face, you know, just, you know, with the texture of the skin and the wrinkles.
When he's crying.
Yeah. And then the cut in the same scene, where you just have this enormous close-up of Viola Davis's eye. Yeah. I mean, I just thought that was like, as an image, it's just extraordinary. I mean, I'm not sure what to make of it, really. You know, because it kind of, you know, the eye is dark. So it's got like a cat's eye. So the light falls on it. And so half of the eye is lit. But actually you still can't see anything, right? Like you don't see an iris or, you know. And then kind of the wrinkles around the eye. I mean, it's just such an extraordinary image, you know, that I was
I'm
just
proud to take it for granted.
Okay.
I thought the one bum note in the casting for me was Liam Neeson.
Oh no, I loved him.
No, I thought he was great. I just thought he was too big a star to die in the first act.
But he
I thought that was
doesn't.
it.
That's exactly my point.
Oh, you didn't believe it?
Yeah, so there was always a part of me was going, he's not dead.
Oh.
So
I thought that was interesting. I believed that it hook, line, and sinker.
Yes, I did as well, actually. The first viewing, I kind of, I just thought, oh, well, this is one of those things where a big star wants to contribute to an
just wants to be
artistic
in it,
project,
yeah.
So I was surprised when he returned, actually. And there's something about, I love him,
yeah.
And there's something just about his presence, right? Because, he must be 65 or something now,
Yeah.
And he's still got that incredible hulking body,
Yeah.
And it's kind of so powerful, and also his persona is so calm,
Yeah.
and powerful, and so on,
Yeah.
right? So actually, I think it really works well in this film, because actually it must have taken some kind of man, to marry a black woman, and to raise a child with her, and aside from him being a criminal and everything. So the hulking presence and the soft voice or the deep voice.
Because you're talking about kind of strength and power and stuff like that, and yet he shows himself to be weak and cowardly and all that kind of stuff, which is really interesting. It's interesting that yet again he's in a film about grief.
Yes.
Because he's almost always in films about, ever since his wife died, he's almost always in films about getting his family back in one way or another.
Yes, he's like the personification of it. Really, I love him.
The shot of him at the funeral in the church for their son, and Viola Davis is crying as she leaves, and it's a shot of him on a very long lens, and he's on the right hand side of the frame, looking over to his son. Like, he's not right in front of it. He can't stand near it, near the coffin, and he's crying his eyes out, looking over. And his sort of chin, lips quivering.
Yeah.
That's an amazing shot to me. The performance with it is, as you say, it's this kind of huge, kind of hulking figure, completely broken.
Yeah.
Which is wonderful. And actually, you see, as you say, you see a lot of that. The only time you see him in any kind of sense of power is when you see the heist right at the start, really. And even then, everything's going wrong. It's not really, he doesn't get a chance to show off or anything. That's not what that's about. Yeah. And when he's revealed in the bedroom of the woman he's cheating with or going off with, his shoulders are slumped. He's looking out the window at Viola Davis as she leaves. He's not happy.
Yeah.
He's not big and strong or anything like that.
Yeah.
And even again, I'm at risk of reading too much into things. But the even in that scene in the church, he's destroying something beautiful. He's pulling the flower apart and just leaving it in a mess on the floor. So I thought he was great in it. I thought his performance was amazing. He was the right size and bulk and intimidating and all that kind of stuff. It's one thing that didn't quite sit right with me.
Okay. Well, with me, I was very surprised because obviously you expect somebody like Stephen Queen to do extraordinary things visually.
Yeah.
But actually, I think the performances are almost uniformly great.
Yeah.
And I was surprised, for example, by Colin Farrell, whom I love and who is great. But actually, on my first viewing, I thought, he was fine, but he was really down my list of what I loved about the film. And actually, you see him again, and he's fantastic, really, and particularly in his interactions with Robert Duvall, right?
That scene is the one that stands out for me particularly, because when there's a point where he looks away and he almost laughs, and and it's that kind of, he can't quite believe that he's finally standing up to his dad. I thought that was really great.
And I think all of the actors are. I can't.
Everybody brought their A game, I think.
Robert Duvall was fantastic, you know. So it's kind of, to me, it's quite amazing that, somebody who doesn't really come from the performing arts, who really comes from kind of, painting or, is a visual artist, is able to elicit kind of these uniformly extraordinary performances. I mean, I also love, he's one of my favorites actually now. What's his name?
Brian Tyree Henry.
Yeah.
Henry.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
He's fantastic.
Right? So, but kind of you expect him to be, because actually the role that he plays is not that far removed from, what he plays in Atlanta or, but, some of the other, Elizabeth Debicki is fantastic.
I thought she was great. I thought she was really good.
So it's kind of, it's kind of an extraordinary film. And actually, I'm tempted to see it again.
You can go without me next time. I've had my fill.
There was again that scene in the flat where Veronica slaps
Debicki.
Debicki, and it looks like she hits her, like she slaps her and then she goes like that, and it looks as though she actually cracked her one and was.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, and they cut away immediately afterwards.
Yes.
So
it's only for a couple of frames, but you get the sense of it.
Yeah, because they probably did cut away, but even the scene with her and her mother as well, where her mum hits her round the back, and it's that big kind of close up on her face, and she runs through a whole range of things.
Yes.
Which is just I thought the performances were all superb. Yeah.
Well, she starts off the film with a black eye.
Yeah.
Doesn't she? Poor old Debicki.
Yeah. She does, but at the beginning you think, this is going to be one of those stereotypical performances, right? Like this beautiful woman who's kind of bashed by, this hunk, because her husband is played by
John Bernthal.
Yeah, it was fantastic. He's got kind of that rough thing.
Yeah.
So, kind of you think, this is going to be that kind of role actually, and then it evolves into like, something much more interesting.
That scene where she buys the gun.
Yes.
And then the swagger she has when she walks out afterwards, you really feel like she's earned it.
Exactly.
She's eating a hot dog and she's she's almost got that kind of Charlize Theron sway as she's walking
It's
around.
because she fucked up the first one. She fucked up buying the van, thinking it's great, and then she got chewed out by Viola Davis for spending too much money, not being able to drive and not knowing what's going on. So when she is resourceful and plays the part of the immigrant Russian mail order bride, and then she gets her gun. She's like, I nailed this one.
Yeah.
And that's when you were saying, it defies the stereotype of the ditzy blonde who can't do anything. Like she gets it done, and she also is able to get done what Michelle Rodriguez isn't able to get done, which is the thing with the blueprint.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you get a sense of these women in the process of change and becoming. So it's like what you said, Lee. So it's not just that they've done something. It's like, when she comes out with the hot dog and kind of, swaying and, she's pleased with herself. She's become somebody she didn't know she could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that was kind of fantastic.
I'm going to have to get going,
yes.
unfortunately.
Well, we should end it here, in fact.
No, that's fair enough. Okay.
So let's wrap it up.
Yes. So
I was glad I saw it a second time. Begrudgingly, I will have to give you the credit of going, yes, I'm glad you dragged me along.
Yes.
I do appreciate it more the second time, and it's led to a really good conversation.
Yes, it has, actually. I mean, I think it's been brilliant. And actually, kind of talking to both of you, it made me see even more things that I hadn't noticed, on my own the second time. So, I mean, to me, it kind of, because when you go see something twice, you kind of have a hope, you're interested, but actually that doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be a payoff. Like some films you want to see twice, and you come, 3 billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri, or whatever. I wanted to see it again, but really it fulfilled my worst. It kind of was actually this one. If anything, I come out of the cinema, and particularly after our conversation, thinking that it was even greater than I felt after the first screening.
Yeah, the conversation has elevated it for me. Which is a good thing. It's just a film that I didn't, get the most of the first time.
Yeah,
I will
that's a
have
good
to
thing.
admit that.
Yeah.
Well, that's the point of some of these films, right? Like, I think, it's...
too few, I think.
Yes.
Days, yeah.
But, certainly in a certain time, the whole point of going to see particular kinds of films is the conversations you'd have with your friends afterwards, really, and I think kind of, this was a great conversation, and the film fed it, and it kind of made me confirmed my initial view of it.
Better for you the second time, Lee?
Yes, it was actually. When I saw it the first time, I really enjoyed it. I did think it was a little long, whereas when I saw it this time, because I was aware that much like the actors, I had to bring my A game, as a viewer. And just every shot has multiple things going on. Every scene, I thought it was great. I've made a commitment to see another film a second time on Thursday with a friend.
Which one is that?
And I'm not looking forward to seeing The Crimes of Grindelwald again. So there is.
I'm not surprised there.
So I'm
we'll have to get because we recorded our podcast on that earlier, so we'll have to get that out so you can find interesting things to look for.
But this has been, really, really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed recording this as well. It's been good fun. Thank you.
Thanks for coming on.
I want to have you again, Lee, for a different podcast. Really, I kind of, I'm very curious about what you do, and also just the general question of what does a film producer do. So I think I'd like to bring you out again to have a general conversation on that.
Sure.
And on what you've been doing, actually, which I really find very fascinating. But in the meantime, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. We're Eavesdropping at the Movies. We're on iTunes, YouTube and SoundCloud, Twitter and Facebook, and eavesdroppingatthemovies.com. Lee, where can you be found and your production and so on?
So, thank you. My company is Vermillion Films. We are based in Birmingham. We mostly produce commercials and branded content and stuff, but I was exec producer on a documentary called War of Words, which was on release last Monday. It's on iTunes. It's $4.99. It was number 6 in the documentary charts.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, and,
it's gone up the hit parade.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's about the battle rap scene in the UK, working with the League, Don't Flop, artists such as Blizzard and Mark Grist, and it's genuinely it's really good.
Okay, well, we look forward to seeing it.
We'll have to do a podcast on it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening.
Alrighty.